Oh, my last video got picked up by the algorithm. I've actually got some subs. Have I attained a smidgen of the internet's attention? Time to blow it all talking about a game from 2003.
Oh, yes!
Just go for it!
This is not a well-known game, so I'm gonna lay down some info. Viewtiful Joe was produced by Capcom and directed by Hideki Kamiya 2 years after his work on Devil May Cry and 1 year after his work on Resident Evil 0. Serving as producer for the game was Atsushi Inaba, who worked on the Ace Attorney series and would go on to work on God Hand and Okami. The development of Viewtiful Joe 2 was handled by the same team under the Clover Studios label, although it was not directed by Hideki Kamiya. 2 spin-off games were also created, Red Hot Rumble, and the other was on the DS. It was a play on the DS's name. Don't remember at the moment. And also a Joe anime ran for 51 episodes. The first season of it was localized and ran in the US on Saturday mornings. Clover was dissolved in 2006 after the departure of Kamiya, Inaba, and another developer by the name of Shinji Mikami, who was known for his work in the Resident Evil series. While these developers would go on to form Platinum Games, the rights for Joe and Okami were left behind and are still held by Capcom. Will we ever get another Viewtiful Joe game? Kamiya expressed as recently as 2020 that he would like to work with Capcom for a Switch remaster of the original game, as well as a sequel to wrap up the once-promised trilogy.
Like I said, there's more to this story. There's 2 more times when Earth will be in danger.
Possibly also a sequel to Okami and some other abandoned IPs. So, for the rest of this video, I'm gonna try and convince you to email Capcom so we can make this happen, because this game was astounding. Joe is a 2D side-scrolling brawler, more formatted like Mario than it would be like Streets of Rage. The enemies have collision, but generally don't cause contact damage. You can push into them, they won't overlap each other on the screen, so things are nice and distinct. The character designs are kind of this chunky chibi look, and the game is cel-shaded with emphasized distinct shadows. It evokes a comic book feel. Everything the enemies do is telegraphed, and the slow motion hits you deliver pack a lot of impact, so the combat is methodical and gratifying. You can rack up combos that create successive cheers and noises, and it's so satisfying. Masses of enemies and tough mini-bosses can demand good power management and reactions, and the difficulty of the game has some really noteworthy spikes going towards the later chapters. Thankfully, the effects that are tied to Joe, as well as the enemies' attacks, are usually really brightly colored or very distinct sounding, so it's easy to track the action even when you're getting mulched. Joe gains the power to use VFX, or visual effects, as superpowers in the game, featuring slow-mo, Mach speed, and zoom. You can use multiple powers at once to stack up their effects and damage, as they're all tied to different buttons on the controller. The game often uses slow and Mach speed for environmental puzzles. This features some goofy game logic, but there are unifying principles so you can come around to understanding of what you need to do. Everything has more impact in slow motion. Not only do you hit harder, but explosions are bigger, engines rev up more, water drops accumulate more water. Propellers slow down and stop supporting things, which can make enemies and objects fall out of the sky. Everything you punch is launched further. Slow-mo is the foundation of the game, and it interacts with everything you do, both the enemies and the environment. Mach speed is used to outrun things in scripted sequences, and it also leaves after images that fade into the background, which can hit certain hidden objects and open secrets. Mach punching for a certain amount of time will also cloak you in heat and make you immune to fire damage. This also causes you to inflict fire damage on your opponents when you attack. If an enemy has set you on fire, you can put it out by running fast, or just by activating Mach Speed for a little bit. It's a less integrated mechanic than slow. Sometimes you want to use the Mach Speed interactions, but you don't have an attack target, and it doesn't rack up as much score as the combo slowdown punches. So if you're trying for a perfect high score clear, it's not your go-to. But since slow-mo also slows Joe, using slow and Mach to move more. If you use them both at once, you can move in your slow a bit faster. Zoom, your third power, is powerful and useful, but visually kind of clunky. It adds to your damage, and when you activate it, certain enemies will cower in fear, so you don't have to wait for their usual opening. But zooming in the camera is always going to make it hard to see what's going on in the rest of the screen. You need to use zoom for a couple puzzles in the game, but it feels kind of shoehorned in, like you're checking a box instead of doing something more organic or set-piecey. It doesn't have a natural attachment to what you're trying to do. There is an extra trick to some of the mechanics in Joe. I mentioned that enemies have telegraphs, but in addition to the skull symbols that signal their attacks, every enemy also has poses and sounds associated with each of their different attacks. On the highest difficulty, the skulls go away, and you have to rely exclusively on these other audiovisual clues. But for a few enemies, the sound or the pose happens before the skull even appears, so learning these telegraphs on lower difficulties can help you dodge attacks more easily sometimes. The story of Joe is an homage to silver screen classics and the tokusatsu genre in particular. The basic baddies really remind me of putty soldiers. This theme is very well paired with Joe's powers and the designs of the game's bosses. The first three bosses in particular echo major movie themes. Charles III is a vampire bat in a gothic castle stage, paying homage. I'm saying homage too much, aren't I? To Dracula, Nosferatu, and other gothic horror. Hulk Davidson, second boss, is a corporate executive, which seems reminiscent of big bads from cop dramas, maybe specifically RoboCop. He's also kind of a biker, which I don't have a movie association with, but I could absolutely be having movie blindness on this. The third boss, Grand Bruce, is just a Jaws reference, both by his name, some of his attacks. He can, spit out a chewed-up street sign, things like that. Viewtiful Joe 2 also features a samurai movie level and, an ancient temple level, which continues to round out the movie tropes. And the last level of the first game is just this gigantic Star Wars reference. You're going into the enemy space station. There are a bunch of surrounding vessels that are basically Star Destroyers. They have these things that are like TIE fighters, but they have 3 discs instead of 2. But they're basically TIE fighters. We all know what's being referenced. It's pretty obvious. As Joe wields movie magic to take down foes, the power of slow motion is center stage both mechanically and thematically. Every explosion is bigger in slow motion. Your powers and the gameplay derive from movie logic, and so do the antagonists and the plot. Joe is a movie buff too, so he'll even call out sometimes when movie logic is at play. We've gone about 17 years without another Joe title. In a few other titles, we've seen echoes of the legacy of Viewtiful Joe. Most notably, those of us who actually bought the Wii U got to play the Wonderful 101 back in 2013, which was thankfully re-released on the Switch and Steam in 2020. Maybe you haven't heard of this one either. The Wonderful 101 is a spectacle fighter that is spliced together with Pikmin, where you fight with a Sentai team of up to 100 superheroes. Your main cast is the classic color coding set. The combat gameplay takes notes from Bayonetta, but the resource management and mid-level puzzles feel very reminiscent of Joe. The powers you gain in 101 are used to solve puzzles and to fight, and the enemies and environment tend to share the exact same visual cues to guide you along what to do. The story beats in 101 really capitalize on Sentai classics like the Blue Lancer having it out with the Red Leader. The character designs feel a lot like Joe, but that's about where the similarities stop, because Wonderful 101 is celebrating Sentai superheroes, and Joe is more specifically celebrating film and tokusatsu. And on the subject of film, we've gained a lot to talk about over the last 17 years. A new Joe game could comment on the notion of reboots and soulless sequels, kind of like we saw in the latest Matrix movie. A shadowy, cash-grabbing producer villain who's been exploiting movie land with CGI minions and killing off practical effects? That sounds like somebody I'd like to punch. We've got tropes like flashbacks and crossovers that we could explore in a new Joe game. The team has had a lot of time to experiment with mechanics and design in other games. I'd be interested to see what they could do in a return to an older IP. So, get on that, Capcom. Thank you all for the support on my last video. I encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, this has been JupiterExile. I hope we wander again soon.